Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Shir, Thursday of Parshas Nosoi. So, our first question tonight actually was asked by a young man on the first night of Yom Tov, which was Sunday night, and he says, "If I had forgotten to make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbos, and now we're going to make Kiddush on Sunday night for Yom Tov. So what do I do with my forgotten Havdalah? Possibly should we do Yak Nahaz without the nun, because you don't use a flame for Havdalah, which is not on Motzei Shabbos. But he has now a dilemma. What does he do with the Havdalah and Kiddush? How do you handle that? So yeah, Yak Nahaz, but then that's Mekadesh L'Kodesh hits me, and that's that here you need to make Mekadesh L'Chel. So I took out my trusty Shkiyos Miyovin book, and he actually addresses it, and he says it's addressed in earlier poskim. And so here we're going to learn it from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. Slightly different setting, but the same. The conclusion will be the same. So this is in B'Simon Reish Tzadik Zayin. No, sorry, Reish Tzadik Tes. Or Mishum is Ane Beis Yom. You've got a fellow who is really preparing for Rosh Hashanah. He's fasting 48 hours leading up to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Gimel. So he's eaten on Shabbos, and Shalosh Seudos was his last meal, and now he's got 2 full days, 48 hours, or he's not going to eat. So he says that you should not leave Havdalah until Monday night, which is already Rosh Hashanah, because then you're going to have to somehow do Kiddush and Havdalah on the same cup of wine. And this involves an Isur of Ein Oimrin Shtei Kedushos Al Kois Echad. There is a concept of Ein Oisin Mitzvos Chavilos. It's unethical to use one item for several mitzvahs. It somehow gives the impression that if you are finding the mitzvahs burdensome and you want to just rattle them off with the one in one shot, and so that it wouldn't be appropriate to use 1 cup of wine for Kiddush and Havdalah. You're going to ask, what about regular Yak Nahaz? But so the Alter Rebbe explains that their regular Yak Nahaz, the Ben Kodesh LeKodesh, acknowledges the Yom Tov. Therefore, the Yom Tov and the Havdalah for on Ben Kodesh LeKodesh and the Kiddush, which is now Yom Tov, they are compatible. Whereas here we're talking about Havdalah for Motzei Shabbos, and now you want to go for Kiddush for the night of Yom Tov. They are two separate inyanim, shtei kedushos, unrelated, and to do them both on the same cup of wine is not okay. And therefore, he says you're fasting for 48 hours, but finish off your fast a little bit before, just before Shkia, you'll make Havdalah, and then you'll go into Rosh Hashanah no longer fasting. So that's what the Alter Rebbe writes in Sif Yud Aleph. In Sif Yud Beis, he goes further. What happened if the person Taka did go into Yom Tov? It's now the night of Rosh Hashanah, and he hasn't made Havdalah yet. So now he has this dilemma. He's got two things on the agenda, Kiddush and Havdalah. Yesterday's Havdalah and tonight's Kiddush. So the Alter Rebbe says the following Eitzah. He should listen to Kiddush from someone else, and he will not eat right away because he hasn't made Havdalah. So he'll take a second cup of wine and he'll use that for Havdalah. He'll drink his Havdalah cup because he's not allowed to eat or drink before Havdalah. So he'll hear Kiddush from his colleague. He himself will make Havdalah in a separate cup of wine, and then he will have Hamotzi, Lechem Mishnah, and so on. So that's the Alter Rebbe's Eitzah. So the young man asked me, what happens? It's all very well if you have someone else to fall back on. Well, what happens if he's all alone and he's got now Kiddush and Havdalah to do? So what I suggest, based upon what I've now learned, something new, so what he would have to do is to prepare 2 cups of wine. On the first cup of wine, he would make Kiddush, and then he'd put down that cup. He'd take the second cup of wine, not say Hagofen, but he would say Hamad Mekedesh Lechil, and he'll say the Bracha of Havdalah. Once he finishes that, he'll drink the second cup, and then he drink from the first cup. Um, I don't know whether he'll manage to get to Lechem Mishneh with it in this way, but meanwhile, he'll have the 2 cups of wine or of course of each one, and this way is Yotze both mitzvahs. I'm going to ask, how can he's made Kiddush on a cup of wine instead of Gofen? And now he's going to make a hefsek by doing Havdalah on the other cup. Why isn't there a hefsek between the Hagofen and his drinking? So the answer is, since he's not able to drink the Kiddush cup without saying Havdalah, therefore the Havdalah is not a hefsek, because it's crucial for him to be able to have the drink of wine. He has to do Havdalah first. So that's obviously even more of a kvetch than the eights of having someone else. That might be why the Alter Rebbe doesn't recommend this. You have someone else, you should ask someone else to make Kiddush, and then you'll do Havdalah. Okay, not a very common question. So we'll leave it at that, and we'll go on to the next question. A couple of Tevilas Kalim questions tonight, actually 3. Um, so someone sent me this picture a few while ago. I was asking whether this cupcake baking tin has to be toveled in mikvah before use. Obviously, the question is that the minhag Asiyas cupcakes is to use cases. To take you have these paper cases, and you put and you put each of these cases inside the various recesses, and then you pour the batter into the case, so that really the cake is not touching the metal. And I believe that was the question. And really that's also true for every baking tin, that generally when we bake cakes, we put a layer of either greaseproof paper or silver foil, so the cake is not actually touching the baking tin. So is that a reason not to have to tovel the baking tin? So we have now on the screen a photograph from the Sefer Psukim Utshuvas, mentioned before, and this is on Yeridea, Siman Kuf Chof, which is the halachas of Tfilas Kalim. And see, he addresses this. If you have a keli which is only used with a lining, so he says if it's just a thin lining, then that doesn't count as a hefsek, and the keli doesn't require tevila, because he says the lining is not really what is facilitating the baking of the food. It's making it easier to manage it, but the lining is bottled to the keli, and therefore you do have to. Now just think about it. You wouldn't be able to bake. You wouldn't be able to bake cupcakes with just in paper cases. Without this kind of container, you wouldn't be able to. So it's really you're baking the cupcakes in the metal. It's just the paper is a lining. Masha you can buy cupcake cases which are made of silver of disposable foil, of tin foil. And they are much more rigid. So those things you don't need such a funny tin. You can just bake them in those cases, and that would have served as a hefsek. So what we're seeing here is that if the liner would be usable on its own, then it serves to interrupt. You're not baking in the outside the keli. But when the lining is in itself not sturdy enough to bake the food, to cook the food, then the lining should be ignored, and you have to tovel the outer keli. Now, I just want to compare this to a perhaps a totally different thing, and that is I've been asked the question, perhaps we've discussed it once. Some people use a polythene bag of some sort, plastic bag, for the crock pot where they put in the cholent. And so they have a bag, a roast bag of some sort, and the cholent is in there. And then they lift it out, and the ceramic housing remains clean. Nu werd er gescheiden. If so, the bag is a keli. The ceramic outside is hot, so it's matmin medova is hatmona medova hamesh of hevel. If you're going to see the bag as a separate keli, then you take a have a question of atmona. But I'd venture to say, no, the bag isn't a separate keli. The bag is a liner. You're cooking in the ceramic. The bag is just a liner, and therefore it's not a problem of hatmona of food in a keli and then wrapping it around with another keli or another material. It's using the same svara, but in Hilchos Shabbos rather than Hilchos Tfilas Kelim. Let's move on. Since we're talking about Tfilas Kelim, here we have another common question, and that is when you want to tovel lots of small items, whether it's cutlery or other small things. So it's common to use a colander of some sort. So is that okay? Um, to set, is it okay to tovel? And what about if it's a sieve? A sieve has got, well, colander has got perhaps lots of space, but a sieve is quite dense. Does that count for toveling kalim in it? So this is again from the same sefer from Piskei Teshuvos, and he's saying you are allowed to tovel one keli inside another keli, provided that the outer keli has got a large opening, which is called shveiferes hanoid. Shveiferes hanoid is like imagine of a large bottle, and it's got a wide neck. He says 5 centimeters, 4 centimeters. It's the mission. The Gemara says if you can put in your 2 fingers and rotate them, so it's about 4 centimeters. 5 is a bit of a chumrah, fine. So if you have one keli inside another keli, and the outer keli has got an opening the size of a shveiferes hanoid, so then it's connected to the mikveh. The water inside the outer keli is connected to the mikveh. But what happens if the outer keli doesn't have such an opening? So let's say you want to dip that's a stroll very popular, these shopping bags. I don't know if they still have them. They used to have these shopping bags, which are made out of plastic, and the sides were full of holes, and then just the bottom was a solid floor. So such a basket. Could you use that for Tvilas Kalim, put a whole bunch of Kalim in it, and to put the basket into the mikveh? So does do the Kalim in the inside the basket, have they been toveled? So he's not so sure about this, yeah. And as a result, what he says is you should, if you want to tovel Kalim in a colander or in a basket, if you lower the basket, the rim of the basket or the rim of the colander is also beneath the surface, so then you've got a beautiful Shveiferes Hanoid plus connection. So let's say the holes don't allow the mikveh to connect with what's going on inside the colander or the basket. But the fact that now that you've put the top of the basket beneath the surface, so then the top of the mikveh, the top waters of the mikveh are connecting vertically with the water in the basket, and in that way you are yotze your tefillah. So that answers the question. You want to use a sieve of some sort to tovel kalim. So if the sieve is open at the top, which it usually is, and you've submerged it in a way that there's water flowing over, then that's not a problem at all. That's a kosher tefillah. Let's move on to our next question. This is going to be a bit more of a choshen mishpat question. So here's the following question. I own a property and I took in a tenant, and their tenant wasn't happy with the kitchen, quality of the kitchen, so he ripped out, at his own expense, ripped out the old kitchen and installed a new kitchen, which cost a good £2,000. Right? Um, then the tenant, after a year or two, decided to move on. Now the tenant turns to me and says, that kitchen, it's worth a few £1,000s. Um, you should really be paying me for that kitchen which I installed. So am I obliged, or can I just turn around and say, I didn't ask you to install the kitchen? I said, you did it at your own expense. What do you want to, nothing to do with me. But on the other hand, now, if before I had a shabby kitchen, now I bring a new tenant, and it's real this snail snazzy kitchen. So then I can get a better rent for it. So I can, there's an argument for both sides. I didn't ask her to install it. On the other hand, I've now got a financial increase of benefit from it. So should I be paying for it, or do I get away scot-free? These are the two sides of it. So we have in Siman Shin Ayin Hey in Choshen Mishpat, we have a whole sugya, which is in the Gemara, Yored Listei Chavere. If Reuven, by his own volition, went to Shimon's field and he planted trees, he planted whatever he invested money, and now Shimon's field is, instead of being a barren field, has now become very valuable. Does Shimon, the owner of the field, does he have to pay Reuven for all the money and which he invested into this field? So it's not such a pashta din, and the pashtas, Shimon does need to pay Reuven how much either how much the benefit is, or how much it cost him. In other words, there can be a small investment and a greater increase in price, in value, or there can be a large investment and a minimal increase in value. And the term Yodel HaTachtoina is that the owner of the field can say, I'm going to have to pay you, but I will pay you the lesser of those two figures. So in this we have different forms. There is a sodaho asuyalita. There is a kind of field which is it is suited, and that's the owner of the field would have sooner or later probably done the same thing, and therefore there's more logic to say that the he should pay for the fact that it was done, even though he didn't ask the person to do it. Whereas if they have it's not oimed, it's lita. Now let's read from this is now. If I've told you about Piskei Teshuvos and about Psokim Teshuvos tonight, then there's another sefer, Piskei HaMishpat. It's also the same style. It's actually someone who lives in London, and he writes: if the tenant did shiputzim, did renovations in the property which are not necessary, he did renovations which the landlord has no obligation to do them. Actually, no benefit to the landlord. Then he has no claim to the landlord for what he invested. Whatever he can physically take away, he's allowed to take away and take his own to hate. You have this expression, uproot your trees. You left trees in my plant. You can take your trees. I don't need them. So if it's a benefit which the landlord has no gain from it, it didn't acquit him of his obligation, and he has no gain from it either, then the landlord doesn't need to pay. Okay, so that's what it boils down to. And so it's quite subjective what exactly what the investment was, and whether it was an investment which was needed by the landlord really, or whether it was not needed. Let's move on. So here I got a call on Erev Yom Tov, leading up to Shavuos, and the shlucha has this interest to generate as much excitement for kids to come for Aseret HaDibros, and she wanted to make a raffle. So I told her you're not allowed to raffle off stuff on Shabbos. And that you can see here on the screen. This is unfortunately missing the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, but it is in the Ramo at the end of the last Seif in Siman Shin Chof Beis. Ve'osur lahatir goylor b'Shabbos afil al yedei goy. You're not allowed to make a raffle on Shabbos. It may be because of Kinyan. So already the Mogen Avram and then the Mishnah Berurah, they're talking about what about, let's say it's a shul that there's only one Kaddish at a time, and there's several candidates who want to say Kaddish, but there's not enough to go around. So then you'll make a goyrel. Similarly with aliyahs, if there's not enough aliyahs to go around, etc. There's privileges, and there's not enough privileges to go around for everyone, so you do a goyrel. So they say that you are allowed to do on Shabbos or Yom Tov. The proof to this is in the Beis Hamikdash. In the Beis Hamikdash, they did a goyrel, the pious, who is going to take the organs, this or up to the Mizbeach and so on. So for privileges, rather than for dividing or for giving an asset, instead of not talking about giving a tangible article. So the goyrel, which is being described that you're not allowed to. Let's say you have a turkey, and you make a goyrel. We're going to now cut off the turkey. Who will have Who will have the drumstick? Who will have the breast, and so on? There, each one with the goyrel will come away with a piece of food which they won through the goyrel. That goyrel you mustn't do on Shabbos. It's like a kind of a business transaction. But if it's a goyrel on privileges, they're not going away with a tangible thing. You're going to have an aliyah l'Torah, then you would be allowed to make such a goyrel on Shabbos. Now, the Mishnah Berurah does bring a svara that from Shavuos Yankiv, I think, that it's talking about a goyrel with a sefer, with pages, etc., that kind of goyrel. So Reb Chaim Noah in Siman Kuf in Ksos HaShulchan, he analyzes this quite carefully, and he shows that there's no difference. That for a privilege, for a goyrel, for privileges, you can do a goyrel on Shabbos. Now, I just want to digress for a moment. In this discussion, someone says, why do they have to talk about the goyrel of the Koyanim? Why don't you talk about the goyrel on Yom Kippur, on the Soil Hashem and Soil Azazel? The answer is that is a thing which is written in the Torah. For sure, that's no different to the Shchitas HaKorban. But the pious, the goyrel which they did for privileges, that, as you know, was instituted by the Rabbanon, because there was before they had like a racing up the Mizbeach, who gets to the halfway line first. And then there was a bit of a scuffle there, and a fellow was pushed off the Mizbeach, off the ramp rather, and he broke his leg, and they saw it getting too much action. So that's when they introduced the goyrel, the pious are putting out their fingers, etc. So that's the proof that for privileges. Okay, so with that inspiration, I said to this shlucha, what about, instead of making a raffle on a toy, what about making a raffle on a privilege? For example, you make an agreement with a local studio that you want to book a baby's portrait, and you'll make a goyrel on. Everyone would be given cloakroom tickets, which will tear off before, and whichever wins, they will have these chus to go later in the week, and they'll go to this in the studio. And so the mummies will be very excited. Really, that's part of the excitement. They'll be able to have a portrait of their darling, thanks to to the ice cream party on with Aser Sadibra somewhere in the background. So I see that going to a winning a ticket of sorts, a voucher that you can go to have your photo, you're not giving them anything tangible. You're giving them a privilege which they can get later. So that's what I suggested. I'm not totally confident with this because there does come into this the question of mechin of Mishabes Lechel or Yom Tov Lechel. You're doing something now to, and it's for to be used later on. The counter argument is, no, I'm doing it because I want them to come today. You can also say that there's the excitement of the winning. So that's I'm not so confident about that. But just the fact that it's for a privilege rather than for a tangible object, that seems to be a valid heter. Right. Let's now go on to our next question. Now, crossing the date line during Sfiras Ha'omer. Now, it was the Rebbe who, I believe, was the first one who raised this question and to point out that since Sphira is your Sphira called Echad ve'Echad, it's not a Sphira of Besdin, it's a personal Sphira, that's the way it's written in the Gemara. And therefore, your Shavuos will be affected if you count differently. So if you were in Melbourne and you counted Sphira at night, on the 15th, then you got hopped on a plane, and 15 hours later you land in LA, and it's also nightfall, and you go to the shul, and they're counting the 15th. But I counted the 15th. So you're going to have to count a day later. You're going to have to count the 16th. But that means, Erev Shavuos, when they're going to, everyone else is saying, Hayoim Tisha V'Arboim, 49 days. Well, for you, it's the 50th. 50th means it's Shavuos. And so the Rebbe was really, he stuck to his guns on this. A lot of people question this, and a lot of other poskim tried to say, actually, someone asked me about using AI for paskening shilas. So he sent me an example. He put in this question to AI, and it says, "Oh no, Shavuos goes according. It's the 6th of Sivan is Shavuos. It's not bound by the day, by the Sphira, and therefore you have to follow whatever is the 6th of Sivan in your local place." Then he goes further. What does the Lubavitcher Rebbe say? Well, the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, the AI says, he says that Shavuos goes according to where you are, but your sphere is messed up. And then a bit further, then they realize, no, actually, the Lubavitcher Rebbe holds that sphere is actually going to affect your Shavuos. Now, and no question, this is a milsa de Tmiyah. It's very surprising that people should be in a community and they've got Shavuos a different day. And because of this, the Rebbe's guidance was not to cross the date line during Sfir Saim. Unless it's mamish no, there's no option kind of, unless it's very, very difficult. Now, things have changed over the years, whereas, let's say, 50 years ago, even 30 years ago, a bocher from Australia would come to America or for a yeshiva. He'd stay on for a couple of years. Now they're going home for Pesach. And so if a young man has got 3 boys, lives in Australia, has got 3 boys in yeshiva in New York, and they come home for Pesach, the difference between them going across the Pacific and crossing the date line or crossing through Asia, so it's a couple of $1,000 to difference for this father, whether they're going to go one way or the other, which is could be a lot of money for some people. And so that's the reality is that as reluctant as we may be, there's a reality of people who have are crossing the date line during Sphira, because they went to Australia for Pesach, and then they crossed through the Pacific, and they got through this whole scenario, and as a result, their Shavuos is a day earlier. when we started Shavuos was on Sunday night. For them, it's already a Motzei Shabbos. They're going straight into Yom Tov. Now, that also, on the other, now this whole, the details of this whole scenario of crossing the date line, the details are not that well documented. So I'm saying that what happens on Zion Sivan? So you're starting Yom Tov on Sunday, and because you're chutznik, you're keeping Monday also. What happens on Tuesday? For you, it's ready. No, it's ready Israel Chag. But if everyone else around you is keeping Yom Tov, so then no, it shouldn't be different to someone from Eretz Yisrael who's in Chutz La'aretz. On the second day of Yom Tov, not allowed to do Malacha. So if someone's coming from Australia, it's true that for you Yom Tov is over, but you shouldn't be doing be allowed to do Malacha even B'tzina on like Eretz Yisrael is in Chutz La'aretz. So effectively, you got 4 days Yom Tov, in Shabbos, and then 3 days on the trot. Okay, but that's not the question which we're dealing with. The question which I was asked is about saying now the Rebbe does address that if you cross the date line and as a result your Shavuos is a day earlier, so then on Hey Sivan you cannot say in davening Zman Matan Torah. It's not the anniversary of Matan Torah, and therefore that line or those 3 words would have to be left out in Kiddush and in Shemona Esra. That was clear what the Rebbe had said at the time. The question which came up to me this year is, what about on the second day of Shavuos? Sorry, on the on Monday, which is for them the second day of Shavuos, and we're all happy to call it Zman Matan Torah Seinu. Are they allowed to say Zman Matan Torah Seinu, or should they not be saying? Now I'm just going to see. I see there's something on the chats. Just all this complicated stuff. Let's see. Someone's trying to send me something. I don't know. I can't read it. Okay. So this is the question. So my first reaction was, well, it's Rav Sivan. It's the day of Matan Torah. Why shouldn't you say Matan Torah Seder? Which brought to the next thing. This actually happens to be a great nephew of mine who kind of sends me this message. They live in Australia, now in New York, and they're making a minyan. And this is really coming to the next question. They have a minyan of Aussies in New York, and they're making a minyan on Sunday. So now, why should they read Aseret Adibris on Sunday, which is not Matan Torah Seinu, and Kol HaBchoir on Monday, which is Yom Tov Sheni for them? How about switching it around? Read Kol HaBchoir on Sunday, and then on Monday you'll read the Aseret Adibris, because it's Matan Torah Seinu. So I said, yeah, that's very logical. He says, but Rabbi Broin says no. So I said, all right. I mean, first of all, here's the Rav over there, but he's sure he's got good reason. Rabbi Broin, actually, I looked up on his site called Ask the Rav or Astra the Rav, and there is a reference to a source. He has a called Astra the Rav, but I couldn't locate the particular article about this topic, so I don't know what his position is. He used to live in Australia. Is very au fait with this whole parasha. Now let's think a little bit differently. Really, there is a svara that why are you keeping 2 days Shavuos altogether? Why do we have second day Yom Tov? Because when they used to proclaim the month according to the citing with witnesses, so then the message didn't get across to the rest of the country and to Chutz La'aretz, etc. So in Chutz La'aretz, it took even the 2 weeks wouldn't be enough, so they had to keep 2 days. But from Rosh Chodesh Nisan until Shavuos, there's plenty of time to know when Pesach was done. So if Shavuos is dependent on Pesach, if you know which days Pesach, or which day with Pesach was established, so then you already can work out 49 days later it's going to be Shavuos. So there's a loshon shelolachleg b'moyados, since on Pesach and on Sukkot in Chutz La'aretz you're keeping 2 days, so to make things equal, so Shavuos is also 2 days. But really, there would have been an argument that Shavuos could be 1 day, because by then the information would have gotten through. So this is something which is written in Rambam, and I'm just going to share with you a story which is discussed in the Chassam Sofer. I think it's Simon Kuf Mem Hey, but this Chassam Sofer was asked the following question. There was a man who's became very ill, and it didn't look like he's going to last very long. And no children, and obviously there was the concern. Oh, and there was a brother of his, which the brother was somewhere in Rome. This was somewhere in Eastern Europe, and this the brother was in Rome. In other words, and the lady, as a poor person, wouldn't be able to afford to travel to Rome to get a chalitza. And this was on Yom Tov, Yom Tov, second day of Shavuos, and so there was a whole pressure. Let them appoint a sofer to write a get, so that she should be divorced before he dies, and then not have to become an aguna with yibum and all that. And the Rov there said no way, and so people were saying, oh, well, I made an argument. When it comes to burying a nifter, a barminon, so then Yom Tov Sheni is kechayil. You're allowed to do Yom Tov Sheni. You can do anything for burial. Why? Because of Kavod HaMes. So he says, well, since the person, he hasn't died yet, but he's going to be anxious that his wife will be left aguna. So the Kavod, the imminent nifter, let's allow Malacha to be done on the Yom Tov Sheni, and let's get a sofer to write a get. That was, and the Rov put his foot down no way, even though he knew that there's going to be consequences. But he said, no, you cannot write a get on Yom Tov Sheni. But there were these lomdim, as this is part of the mazel of some rabbonim. They have lomdim there who machen zeh meshigah. So there was one of the lomdim who said, how come you didn't allow to make a get? Now this woman is left as an aguna. You could have made a get written on Yom Tov Sheni. So he says, you know what? I'll write to the Chassam Sofer. And here the Chassam Sofer digs in. He says the Rav was right. And he says Yom Tov Sheni of Shavuos is stricter than other Yom Tov Sheni. Other Yom Tov Sheni is because of a kind of inherited Suffolk situation. Shavuos was not because of a Suffolk. By Shavuos, everything was sorted. But they still mishlelachlik b'murdos. And therefore, there's no heter there's no leeway on it. So coming back, so the second day of Shavuos. So why are we keeping this the second day of Shavuos? So like this, Pesach this year. Which day of the week was Pesach? You remember? First day of Pesach. First day of Pesach was on a Sunday, yeah, because we had Shabbos Erev. And then 50 days later, whatever is Shavuos, 51 days later. If Oder had 30 days, then the first day of Pesach would not have been on Sunday, would have been on Monday. And therefore, Shavuos would be a day later. So now, the fact that, in other words, what I'm saying is, you have now this fellow who came across the Pacific, and he says, well, my Shavuos is on Hay Sivan because of the dateline. And he has to keep a second day, but he has to keep a second Hay Sivan. It's not that now it's Vov Sivan. He's keeping Yom Tov on Monday. Perhaps Pesach was on Monday, and therefore he has to keep Shavuos another day. So his second day of Shavuos is a suffix, whether it's Hay Sivan. But he's not celebrating Vov Sivan. He's celebrating a Yom Tov Sheni of Hey Sivan. And therefore, if that svara makes sense, then he shouldn't be saying Zman Matan Torah Seinu, even though it's true. But he's not celebrating. He's not celebrating Vov Sivan. He's celebrating Hey Sivan. If that's the case, then I can understand why Rabbi Broin says, don't make a Kriyas HaTorah topsy-turvy and do Aser Sadibus on Vov Sivan. As far as you're concerned, this idea of celebrating Zman Matan Torah Seinu, you've missed out on this year because you're celebrating Shavuos on Hey Sivan. That's what I'm suggesting. Sure, there's room to argue, but yeah. Let's move on. So someone sent me an email earlier this week asking, how long earlier? Not much of a week this week. I didn't open my email for 2 days. So he asks me, is there a minhag of dropping the tone when it comes to Vayhi Ha'om Kemis Oinanim? He's already preparing for next week. So we know traditionally that the Toichacha, the Bal Koire, drops his tone for the Toichacha, but in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, as you can see on the screen, for Simshon Ein Ches, it's Christopher of Shabbos, he has a list besides those two, but also by the Egel and also by the Misoinanim. That's the piece after Vayhi bin Soya. So Vayhi Ha'om Kemisoinanim, then the complaining. So that piece should be said in a lower tone. That's what the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says. And he's asking what's Minhag Chabad. So I don't have, besides Sefer Minhagim, which does not address this point. So I don't really have a clear place where this is discussed in Minhag Chabad. I'm going to just say what we've seen. Now, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, you have a Sefer Shari Ephraim from Ephraim Zalman Margolis, and on this we have a Pirush called Shari Rachamim, and he writes, "V'chein beparshas b'haloi sucha." In some places, the minhag is to say "Vayihi ha'om k'misoinanim" until "V'hamon k'zraga" to say it in a lower tone. V'nara naru pashte, which means you've got different minhagim in different locations. Or b'mechois Poland, in the region of Poland, koirim rak ha'toichachos b'kol namach. It's only the toichachos, but not other parts of Kriyas HaTorah. I think our Bal Koire, Rabbi Yosef Lando, I think he does go down a tone. My father, Olav Sholem, I don't remember him making any difference. So what exactly is the Minhag Chabad on this? I don't know. It's probably the same as before the Rebbe made it a whole mivtza to be mevar Minhag Chabad. Every shtetl did the Minhag of their shtetl. And the Rebbe, B'chaim of the Frierdiker Rebbe, saw the need to galvanize that there should be a global Minhag Chabad, and that's why he made all of the Reshimis of Minhagim, which were published in the backs of the Memorim, and then the Hayom Yom, and subsequently these were put together in the Sefer HaMinhagim. So those things which we have recorded, but otherwise we go back to the way it was, each place to their own. I have another couple of minutes. Two more questions. And that is, you can see this ice machine. And this person's asking, does it need to be toveled? And I can understand any electrical machine, there's always going to be the question, if I tovel it, I'm going to ruin it. So do I have to tovel it? Now, looking at the picture, I see it's made out of plastic. Now, plastic does not need to be tovel min adin. I know Lubavitch, we are machmir to tovel plastic, obviously without a brocha, but min adin, it does not need to have a tefillah. And Spurs says if here there's a risk of ruining it, so it does not need to have tefillah. So here's the question: what about a frying pan which is coated with Teflon? Now, Teflon is not metal. Does a frying pan, which is coated with Teflon, need to be toveled? And the answer is yes, because the Teflon is toffel. It's it's a coating for the pan. So you have here a metal body, and then it's got an which requires tevila. Then it's coated with a non-tevila material. But then you say we look at the main body. So if that were the case, perhaps you should say the same thing here. Now, I don't think that is true. I think this is actually not, yeah, although I haven't taken it apart, my imagination is that this is it's not a metal piece covered in plastic. It's a plastic piece, it's a plastic bucket. Somewhere in the plastic bucket, there's an element, a cooling element, which is going to make that the inside the bucket is going to be very cold. But it's not, it's a metal bucket coated with plastic. Now, I might be totally wrong, but that's my guess. If that's the case, it doesn't need to be totaled. It's a plastic bucket which has got a cooling system on the outside. We have our last question. Someone asked me about going to mikveh on Yom Tov afternoon to prepare for Yom Tov Sheni, or to go if you have Yom Tov leading into Shabbos, going to mikveh on the Yom Tov afternoon to prepare for Shabbos. Now, I looked for this today and I didn't find it. I remember years ago reading in the Hiskashrus a reference to somewhere in, I think in Samach Vov, in Sefer Mor Samach Vov, about such a thing about going to mikveh on Yom Tov afternoon to prepare, was it for Yom Tov Sheni or for Shabbos? What I can testify is that that's not the regular minhag. How can I testify? I don't know. I mean, I don't say if I stand as a guard outside the mikvahs, but I don't hear about it. So in Stama, it's not a very common thing. But the fellow who asked me this, he asked me, how could you allow such a thing? Because it's mechin from, now you're not allowed to prepare the beds from one day to the next. You can't roll the Sefer Torah from one to the next. How could you allow going to mikvah on Yom Tov afternoon to prepare for the next day? Which I was stumped by the question. Uh, Thank you, Reb Mendel. Going back to the previous question, I'm sorry for interrupting, that in Reb Chaim Noah writes Bade in Hashulchan that there is such a meaning of saying Vahi comes quietly, but loy noagu etzleinu bozeh. Okay, so that confirms that it's not our meaning. Thank you. Right. So back to what you have on your screen is a sefer on Yom Tov, halachas of Yom Tov. So it has here the following: Yesh oimrim shemuta litboil b'yom tov rishon, that you are allowed to tovel on Yom Tov Rishon towards the evening to prepare likonis l'Shabbos b'ta'aro. So I don't know why he calls it Yom Tov Rishon. I'm not sure. You follow? Either you're talking about Yom Tov Rishon, Yom Tov Sheni, you're talking about Yom Tov which is on the Shabbos. It can be in Eretz Yisrael. It can be one day on Yom Tov, okay, which is Erev Shabbos. So I'm not sure why he does that. But meanwhile, there are those who allow you to tovel on Friday, Yom Tov, to prepare for Shabbos. Now, he in the notes he brings here that in the Gemara it talks about toveling stuff. And it says even kalim melifnei Shabbos, v'odom b'Shabbos. Kalim you have to tovel before Shabbos, but a person can tovel on Shabbos. The reason is because when a person goes into a pool of water, who says is doing it as a tikkun, as to repair something or to prepare something? He's going because it's hot. It wants to cool off. So that's the heter. So if you tovel kalim, you'll miss a tikkun kali. If a person tovels, look at Nira Kameka is going to cool off. Then he says that Mayor Bransdorf in Knei Boyson says that's all very well, in a more primitive kind of mikveh. But nowadays, no one goes to the mikveh just to cool off. They're obviously going as for tvila, for tara. And therefore that raises a question of preparing from one day to the next. But then he says, it could very well be that it's not just a preparation for later. You want to be now, before your Shabbos or before the next, you want to be now in a greater state of Tara, and therefore he says there is room to be Mekel. And what does he have? Emes ikatachas atar, not to be Torah b'Shabbos, but you should be makabel kedushas toisvus Shabbos in a pure state. And therefore, it's not hachona; it's for today. So there's room to both ways. As I said, it's not a common minhag, but the question of hachona, you can get around it by saying that the purpose is the present. I just want to connect this with the shiloh which I had earlier with the raffle or the voucher for the studio. I'm going to use the same argument which they're using here to allow the mikveh to say the same thing there. It's not it's not just a preparation to go and get a picture done in the studio. There's a simcha now that you've won a prize, and therefore it's a simcha which is for the present. I know you can argue that they're not identical. Okay, I'm going to stop with that. Wish you all a good Shabbos and Besoros Tovis, Besoros Hageula with Moshiach Tzidkenu, Malkeinu V'Roshenu, M'heir V'Yameinu Mamish.
Good, Shabbos, good.
Yes, koyach.